Welcome to the Troxel podcast. I'm Evan Troxel, and in this episode, I welcome Steve Burrows. Steve is a structural engineer who spent almost 3 decades at Arup, where he led the engineering on projects like the Bird's Nest Stadium for the Beijing Olympics and the City of Manchester Stadium. He went on to run AECOM's building engineering business in North America, then served as executive vice president at WSP before joining Katerra as head of engineering in the mid-2010s. He was awarded a CBE for his civil engineering work overseas. He's appeared in the IMAX documentary Dream Big, and he's hosted television series exploring ancient structures through the lens of modern engineering. Today, he runs B2 Burrows, his own consulting practice, where he advises both traditional firms and construction startups on preparing for the future and how to stop doing things the way they've always been done. In this episode, we explore why the construction industry operates like a broken system that nobody seems to want to fix, why engineers and architects spend more time in meetings than actually engineering and designing, and what it would take to shift from selling time to getting paid for value. You might say Steve has a way of cutting through the noise. He really frames the problem simply. Define what you're optimizing for, get the right people in the room, and figure out how to scale the solution. It sounds almost obvious, but almost nobody does it. The AEC industry keeps trying to solve every problem at once while sitting in meetings and answering emails, and Steve makes the case that the fix starts with the individual, not the institution. Grab a piece of paper, write down what you actually did today, divide it into what matters and what doesn't, and get rid of everything on the wrong side of the page. It's the kind of advice that's almost too simple to take seriously, which is exactly why most people won't do it. As usual, there's an extensive amount of additional information in the show notes, so be sure to check them out. You can find them directly in your podcast app if you're a paid supporter of Troxel Plus. That's just one of the perks. And if you're a free member, you can find them over at the website, which is at TRXL.co, which is where you can sign up to become a member. So without further ado, I bring you my conversation with Steve Burrows. Steve, welcome to the show. I've brewed a fresh cup of coffee. I'm going to attempt to stay up with you. I believe that the only time that I've seen you in person was at the Built conference. I think was it Seattle maybe or St. Louis? You did like a keynote.
Whiskey on stage?
No. Yes, I think you were.
Yeah. Well, there you go. There you go. So maybe I'm drunk. I don't know.
But I mean, we were talking about prefab construction, modular construction. That's what you were talking about. And I know that you've had a stint at Katerra, head of engineering there. And so maybe you could just start off by giving an overview of the trajectory of your career.
Yeah, well, thanks for the opportunity to have the conversation. And I'm not trying to sell anything or even promote myself. I'll give you my background, but, it's just for sort of reference, really. I'm an engineer. I'm an engineer by training. I spent most of my career at Arup. So I worked for Arup for 29 years. And then subsequently, I moved to the United States about 20 years ago. And I wanted to work for different firms. So I ran AECOM's building engineering business in North America, US and Canada, for a while, and then joined WSP, who wanted to grow their consultancy in the United States, where I spent 4 years. Before meeting Michael Marks at Katerra in a meeting where he wanted us to do his engineering. And I just loved the idea of working in Silicon Valley. And so that was back, I can't remember, 2015 or 2016. And in the last 10 years, that's pretty well what I've been doing, working with startups related to construction, a variety of different things. And also consulting. I had my own business. I do consulting with traditional companies, mostly on preparing for the future. So that's my sort of career in a nutshell.
Yeah, that last part right there, preparing for the future. I think that was something that kind of kicked off the spark for this conversation, right? Which was you commented on one of my recent episode posts regarding, that AI is making boring buildings easier, right? That was a conversation I had with Pablo and from Heatherwick, and it was something that I brought up during the conversation because we're seeing a lot of a proliferation of tools kind of in this BIM 2.0 category, which is something that Martin Day over at AEC magazine kind of coined that term, I believe, and it's just like, where is BIM heading? And a lot of the software demos I see, of course, because a lot of these software companies are tackling early stage design, it's just the selling proposition of design, and I'm using my podcast air quotes for those who aren't watching this, is very boring stuff, right? And you have to tackle the boring stuff. I totally understand why, right? You've got to start somewhere. But this has been a struggle of mine for selling these kinds of ideas to the people who are actually going to use these tools to do design work. It's like, I don't like how that looks. And I think that's a big part of it. Like let's just be honest. So anyway, I'm curious, like, what does this spark for you? You are working with engineering companies in this space about the future of their process. There's definitely an attack on the kind of codifying the processes and workflows of engineers, really specifically, because a lot of that is rules-based, constraints-based, math-based stuff. I'm really curious where you are at in this current part of the timeline.
I don't just work with engineering firms. I work with all different firms throughout the construction industry. So, and the reason I do consulting work for firms is mostly because I want to understand where things are currently at. It would be easy to not to be relevant, because, you know, people would say, you know, if I make a comment, sometimes people go, well, you left Arup in 2011, so your comment's not relevant. I don't agree with that. You know, I try to stay relevant. But mostly I want to work with startups, but you've got to understand where the construction industry's at. And you know, I'm of the opinion, you said, you know, most design is standard. Frank Gehry said 90% of architecture is shit. And I sort of agree with that. I think most of it, there's an awful lot of crap out there. And you know, there's a lot of things you can do. You know, construction buildings are basically custom products made from standard parts. So they all you know, there's 2x4s in all these buildings, and yet we consider them to be unique. And most of my career, I was working on projects like the Bird's Nest Stadium for the Beijing Olympics, and we would invent things because we didn't have a way of doing them. There was no other way of doing them. And my frustration was always, why aren't we, these things that we invent, why aren't we using them for the 90% of buildings that are standard? Why don't we have a way to do standard buildings so fast and efficient and cost effective?
Yeah.
And only then we can all spend our time doing the really difficult projects, which are the ones that we really want to be working on. But we didn't. We did exactly the opposite. And I think, you know, my view, just to sort of set the scene for this, my view is that the construction industry is, if Ricky Gervais decided to make a new TV series and call it The Site instead of The Office, it would be funnier than The Office.
I love it.
Because it's just a pile of nonsense. Most architects that I know will say to me, they spend almost no time designing buildings. They go in the morning, then there's a scope change. They go in scope meetings, they're in project management meetings, they go in coordination meetings, RFI meetings, cost-saving meetings, value engineering meetings. And then if they've got nothing else to do, they have some time to design. And the design is broken up into time between answering emails and phone calls. You know, we've just designed a really awful system. Yeah. And most startups are trying to plug in to a really awful system. And that's why it doesn't work. Because they go, after a while, I've got a really great idea, but I've got to sell it through this fragmented, fractured, discombobulated construction industry. And people have got to control the things that they can control. And they don't. They tried to change the industry. Katerra did. I loved my time at Katerra. Really enjoyed it. Katerra failed. It wasn't a failure for me personally. And, we've gone on and done other things. And if you go and look at Gropius, for example, which I'm involved in now, you can see the sort of, the seeds of Katerra's failure growing into success at Gropius. So, I really enjoyed it. But Katerra was trying to change an entire industry as a single company. And that was very flawed as a concept. And so, you've got to, if you're going to make money, you've got to find a way to fit in. But if you want to be efficient, if you want to do things that you can control in the most efficient way, do that. And the construction industry is like one big episode of The Office right now, I think.
There's so many different directions we could go. I feel like what I'm very curious about, you talked about kind of this flawed baseline state that everything is just operating in like we're okay with it. And I'm like, how do we design our way out of that? Because that's what we have the opportunity to do. But I mean, there's all these other distractions. There's all of these other, we have the tunnel vision. We as being, the professionals in the industry, we've got to deliver projects. We've got to push all the paper around. We've got to make sure that all the boxes are checked and the risk is avoided at all costs and all of these things. How do we begin to design our way out of that? To like, does the industry actually have to fail so that a new version can replace it? Or
no, I think if you approach any problem, so I have a standard way of approaching any problem. So the broken construction industry, let's say that we want to solve the broken construction industry. So the first thing you need to do is you need to define the problem that you're trying to solve. So if for example, you want to optimize, there are three parts, right, to construction: time, cost, and quality. Right? Which one do you want to optimize for? Mm-hmm. Right, so pick one. So you say, I'm going to optimize for cost. Then you say, okay, who do I need in the room to optimize for cost? What skills do I need in the room? And you get those skills together. And then you say, if we solve this, how do we scale it? And so you have a plan that you don't just fix it once. You can apply it to whether it's your business or the industry or whatever. And construction doesn't do that. Construction tries to solve everything at the same time. I see startup companies talk to me, I would say every week, a different startup talks to me. And they fit into a number of categories. I'd say more than half of them have a solution, but don't know what problem they're solving. Right. So they're a solution looking for a problem.
Yeah.
That's a disaster. And they don't know it because they've got an interest in AI and they figured something out and they go, oh, I've got an idea how to get rid of RFIs. All right, get rid of folks. What problem are you solving? Getting rid of RFIs. Is it a cost-saving problem or a time? What? They don't know, but isn't it a good idea to get rid of RFIs? And so you see these decks. The construction industry is broken. McKinsey wrote a report 20 years ago that said something, and it's big. And if we can just get 1% of it, our investors will be rich. Give us some money. And those are sort of like a typical startup deck. Complete waste of time, right? So solve a problem, optimize for time, cost, or quality, and understand the value of what you're optimizing for. Put a group together who can solve it and then figure out how you scale it. And that's a big problem for software in the construction industry because virtually nobody buys enterprise software. And if you have to sell software on a project by project basis, you'll need a sales team the size of the Chinese army in order to do it. So you've got to control, you've got to decide. If you're an engineering firm, right now, you've got to say 90% of what we do is standard. So let's make that as efficient, as simple as if X happens, we do Y. Let's design ourselves the most efficient process for 90% of our work. And we might use AI. We may have a second brain AI bot that does most of that work eventually. But let's optimize for that. And let's spend our time, give our engineers time to engineer, get them out of meetings, get them up focused on doing engineering and working on the 10% of problems that aren't solved by the standardization. And you would be the most efficient engineering design company that could be possibly invented. And that's a great place to start. And if every part of the industry did that, we transform the industry. But people keep trying to solve every problem at the same time whilst they're sitting in meetings, answering their emails. And I just don't know why people get paid to do that. I mean, the number of people I'd sit in meetings in the corporate world with 20 people in the room, and 10 of them would be on their smartphones answering their emails. They didn't want to be there. Why do we accept that? It's an episode of The Office.
Do you feel like that is just because they've become too accustomed to that, and there's obviously that stuff is swimming around in their heads, so then they pull out the phone, they're like, I'm going to take care of this right now, and like you really get to a point where you're not even aware that you're doing it, but you're just doing it all the time because the incoming is happening all the time.
Well, people do it.
No boundaries.
I'm not going to go at smartphones. It's people have lost the... Yeah, one of the questions, I have to be a bit careful, right, because I'm old, right? I have to be a bit careful that I don't sort of sound like the past was great and the present's not as good. Because, I have this saying, nostalgia is not what it used to be. It's sort of, we remember things in the past with rose-tinted glasses. But people have lost the ability to be present. Yeah. And, my wife and I will, if we're out to dinner, and we sometimes we look around and we'll go, how many people are sitting?
Are just glued to the phone.
Couple sitting across the table from each other.
Yeah.
And, whether they're on a date or they're just going out to have dinner together, both of them on their phone. And we go, why is that happened? And that happens, it happens in the workplace and outside the workplace.
Right.
But people have lost the ability to be present. And I think it's because people have lost the ability to focus on what is important. And so if you're paid some money, the difference between my work now as a consultant and when I was paid is I used to say, when I was paid by a company on a salary, I was paid while I was in the bathroom going to the toilet. And now I'm not. I'm only paid for what I do. And it's much better to be focused. If you could behave like a consultant and say, I'm gonna work for what I'm paid to do. I'm gonna do what it says in my job description that I'm paid to do, and I'm gonna make that the most important thing in my work life. And that might not be sitting in a meeting. Then you would get better productivity. And people have they've just lost the ability to focus because they don't try to focus anymore. But it's perfectly acceptable to sit in a meeting and do your emails.
I was going to say that, like it's culture at this point, right? Because everybody's doing it. It's like there's permission to do it. And that permission is not stated out loud, but it is modeled by every different leader, even in the hierarchy, right? And so it just becomes this thing that's totally permissible to do all the time.
And at Katerra, one of the things that was a shock to Michael Marks, who was the CEO of Katerra when I was there, was for a period the interim CEO at Tesla, and he developed some Elon Musk traits. I'm not an Elon Musk fan. I'll state that up front, but he developed some of the traits, and we would sit in meetings, and he would, after a few minutes look around, then say to somebody, "Why are you here?" And if he didn't like the answer, he'd tell them to leave. And at first I thought, oh gosh, that's harsh. And then after a while I thought, actually, it's not harsh. What he's saying is, come prepared, come to be able to contribute and help make us take a step forward, or don't come at all. And I thought, it's probably a reasonable approach to anything, anytime. Because, I was, I did get to a point, in the corporate world at WSP, which is an absolutely amazing company, where I was looking and going, gosh, I spend 60% of my day in meetings.
Yeah, those people don't want to be there either. The ones who are sitting there doing absolutely nothing, right? Like they showed up out of kind of this weird obligation.
We would make board meetings last 2 days.
Ugh.
And then we would fill the time because we were flying in and out.
Right.
We'd fill the 2 days with meetings and presentations, and and people would be watching the presentation, answering their emails, and you sort of, and eventually you go, gosh, we're the highest paid people in the organization.
Yeah.
And we're just finding ways to fill our time. And that is just sort of not the right way to approach things.
So a startup mentality is quite different than that, I think, right? The idea of, especially with a small team people are wearing many hats and having to do probably way too much, like actually do way too much. And so I'm curious what you think what the solution is here, because it's a behavioral, cultural issue.
I actually think startups, my experience is startups very quickly model the same behavior as the corporate world. They start out different, but they very quickly morph into sitting in meetings, making time, doing their emails in meetings, and not focused on the problem they're trying to solve. I think they start out well with the construction industry, and they then try to fit into the construction industry. And I think startups have got to focus all the time. My involvement with startups, if you get any of the startups that I'm involved with on your show, they'll tell you the same thing, is I'm always saying, just focus on the problem. What problem we're trying to solve? Let's stick to the problem that we're trying to solve and not get drawn into all these other things that will just fill up our time and make us feel like we've been productive. But at the end of the day, when we're traveling home, we can't tell you what we actually did that day. We can't actually say what progress did we actually make today. And that was
moved the needle.
And I found that was a problem in my job, that I started coming home and saying, what did I really do today?
Yeah.
And when the answer, after a while, when you start going, not much, then you say, I'm only on this earth for a limited period of time. And is that really how I want to spend it? Doing not much? And the answer is not really, no.
This episode is made possible with support from Avail. Is your firm managing architectural, landscape, interiors, and engineering content? Avail's all-in-one content management solution stretches across all disciplines, file types, and content locations, so production teams can find everything they need all in one place. Thanks to Avail's desktop application and Revit, AutoCAD, and Civil 3D plugins, teams can consistently find and reuse all types of content, from specifications and calculations to 3D models and plans. As a result, standards-compliant models and drawings are easier to create, the documentation process is less chaotic, new hires are easier to onboard, and projects are delivered faster with fewer errors. Visit getavail.com to request a demo. That's getavail.com to request a demo. My thanks to Avail for supporting this episode of the Troxel Podcast. Now let's get back to the conversation. Yeah, that is I love that perspective, and I see exactly the behavior that you're talking about. And I'm curious, how do we start to change that culture? Because you're busy, not productive, right? It's like I'm checking boxes because things are quote unquote important and quote unquote urgent, so much so that I have to take my eye off of what we're actually trying to do here, the problem, as you put it, right? To shuffle paper around.
So the way first of all, just my 3 points again. What problem are we trying to solve? Mm-hmm. Do we have the right people? And how are we going to scale it, right? So you've got to
just be ruthless about
all
that
the time. And then the other thing you've got to do individually, what you've got to do is you need to get a piece of paper, and first of all, you need to record what did you do each day. You need to keep a record of what you actually did. And you don't. The way I do it is I say, one is, am I doing productive things like strategic planning, whatever I might consider to be productive things, and I say that's the highest and best use of my time. And on the other side, I put a line down the middle of the paper. On the other side, on the right hand side, I write the other things, right? And I go, I don't get rid of everything on the right side of the page. I've got to get rid of that. I do less of that and more of things on the left hand side of the page. So you record your time. over a period, keep a good record. Timesheets in the construction industry are works of fiction, right? Yeah. And so make accurate recordings of, did I sit in meetings? Was it a good meeting, useful meeting or not? So decide which side of the paper it goes. And then get rid of everything on the right-hand side. Either delegate it or don't go. Say, I'm just not coming to these meetings anymore. It's not a good use of my time. I'm not contributing. I don't learn anything. I don't want to be there. So either change the meeting or I won't come, right? So take control of what you do during the day. If everybody did that, they would immediately become significantly more productive. Mm-hmm. And you know what? Your boss isn't going to be unhappy if you've got a boss. Your boss isn't going to be unhappy about it because they're going to go, gosh, you're trying to do what you're paid to do and less of the stuff that you're not paid to do. So I think it's a good approach. And then, like everything else, if you want to change, you have to stop doing something before you can start doing something else. So when you stop spending 40% of your time doing things that are a waste of your time, you can then say, with that 40% of my time, what am I going to do? So maybe I want to automate, standardize, do something with the 60% of my time that I do want to do. So you can start to make change. You can start to make a difference. And, I reckon you can be twice as productive very easily by spending your time standardizing the things that you do every day. And a good example of that, when I first joined Arup in 1982, which shows how long ago it was, I remember we were designing reinforced concrete. And after a while, I thought, gosh, I'm doing the same calculations over and over again. And I was one of the first people out of college that was trained in computer programming. And we just had a Hewlett-Packard 9845 and it ran on tapes. And I thought, I'm just going to write code to design reinforcement for reinforced concrete sections. And so I did. It wasn't hard. There was a British standard process. So there was a standard, and I just wrote some code. And then I just put the sections in and it designed it and it printed it out on a piece of paper. And I did it for myself because I thought, I'm not doing the same calculations over and over again. All I need is a bending moment and a shear force and a deflection. And I can design any concrete section in bending at any time I want. And so I standardized it. But I never said anything to anybody. I just did it because I thought it's going to be really boring if I just do the same thing over and over every day. And I'd like to create some time to do more interesting things. And I see exactly the same thing today. How many engineers, structural engineers, listening to this podcast spend their day designing a 20-foot span steel beam over and over and over and over again and getting paid for it over and over and over again? Why? Why do they do that?
That's a good question. I'm curious. I would actually like to know the answer to that because I totally understand what you're saying, and I can't imagine anybody's actually doing that. Like with what I know about what's possible in our industry, and so they're
designing the same thing. They're designing the same multi-family housing project in wood that they've designed 100 times because that's how they got the project. They told the client, "Yeah, give us this project, because we'll do it for this amount of money because we've done it 100 times before."
Yeah.
And so, why doesn't the client say, "Well, if you've done it 100 times before, surely it costs almost nothing now to do it because you've standardized it so much that you simply just take my project, put it into your model, and the permit set comes out like that." But they don't. They get paid almost exactly the same fee to do it next time. I mean, what industry does that?
So where do you stand on that? Because that points to, obviously, like these kinds of things can be codified, and they should be, so that why do you need to spend your time on the professional side reproducing a facsimile of what you've done 100 times before? And yet we're incentivized, we as the industry, to charge for time that we spend on projects, and therefore the incentive is to spend time on projects instead of charge for value. And at the same time, you say, well, why does it surely it costs a fraction of how you've done it before because you've standardized it. So how do professionals like survive in this kind of a climate where it's like, well, surely it shouldn't cost that much to do this. You've done it before, and yet you charge for time. And so that's why we continue to do it that way.
Yeah. And so you bring, that's a really good point. You bring this to the crux of the problem. So go back to my point. What problem are you trying to solve? Who do you need in the room, and how do you scale it? So the problem you're trying to solve is instead of selling time, you want to get paid for the value that you create.
Mm-hmm.
So stop bidding on time. I mean, every engineering firm wants to sell more time. So
Mm-hmm.
I've actually heard engineers say this to me. I'm a big fan of multidisciplinary engineering. So let's call it structure and MEP in the same house.
Mm-hmm.
And I go, because I think you produce better solutions for the clients. And structural engineers say to me, no, that will be a disaster. We make most of our money when the mechanical engineer wants a hole through the beam, because that wasn't in our price. And so we can say that's a change. We said, no, change your order to the client. It's non-competitive at this point. We can charge whatever we want. We get paid 30% or more fee for making changes than the original fee. And we make 10% profit. So all of our profit theoretically comes from all of the changes. You're benefiting from a broken construction industry.
Right.
Who pays? The client pays.
Right.
And so as a result, we're in a situation today where, our children can't afford the houses that we were brought up in. They can't afford to buy the houses because the costs of construction have risen so much than the cost of income. And so as a result, the American dream is dead because nobody, whether you can find a job now coming out of college is a moot point, but you definitely won't be able to buy a house. So what have we done to society when we've created that situation? And the reason that these things are more expensive is the construction industry is broken, and the customers have to pay for the broken construction industry. So if you said, no, we're going to get paid by value, and you said to your client, we don't need you to pay us anything for designing this project. Our fee is zero. All we want is when the project is got its permit, whatever the value that's created, when it gets a permit, then it's got more value, right, than it been prior to a permit.
Right.
At that point, your value has gone up, and you give us a share of the value that's been created. Now, many engineers listening to this will say, no client would ever go for that. But if you were seen instead of as a cost, but as a value add
Investment. Right.
then they will. And we did research in Arup back in 2005 or 6 or something like that. I did a global study on how to get paid for value. And there were some simple rules. If clients trust you and you've worked for them before and they believe in what you say, they will do it. They will try it. And once it's successful, things will change. When AI does all of the standard engineering without human involvement, and engineering costs go to 10 towards 0, how are engineers going to get paid unless they start getting paid for value?
That's the question, right? I mean, because we are actually talking about software that has that potential, if not, can't do it already, right? We're talking about things like Augmenta, Consigli, like these are big names in the news recently and in recent episodes of this podcast, just doing exactly what you just said. And so how do they, so what are they proactively doing to figure their way out? Like where do they go next? Instead of just being in this reactive mode and just be like, the sky is falling, or just continuing with business as usual.
Well, what has happened? The current state of play. So back to a scene in the office, right? So the current state of play in the Ricky Gervais show, The Site, is that everybody's sitting in their office, looking out at the world and saying, well, we don't want to go first, right? Things will go wrong. So there are sort of a number of options. One is that some startup will be successful, maybe considerably bought by AECOM. Maybe AECOM will transform its business model and suddenly everybody will have to follow. Yeah, maybe. And so some people are saying, we'll watch that and see if that happens. The second one is, maybe at some point the software will be so good and our competitors have proved that it works that we'll buy some too, and we'll be just like them, and it'll just be a new competitive world that we'll plug into. And then the third category is we're going to go and try and do this first. And so nobody in construction believes that there's ever a benefit of going first, right? Because what's the history of that? Who's ever gone first?
Failure.
Got a first mover advantage in construction. Nobody. I mean, I worked with Skanska in the early 2000s, where we did a building. It's the Met Office headquarters in Exeter, and we did it as a kit of parts. So we created a kit of parts, put the building together, incredibly successful. There was never a second building. We did it once. The team broke up. Every construction project has a new cast of characters. So, it's like an episode of The Office in which next week it's a whole new different group of people. That's
V2. Yeah.
and then everybody sells. Everybody in construction for years has sold. We've done 100 of these projects, but nobody who works on the project.
But never with this team.
Worked on any of the 100 projects, or maybe they worked on one of them or two of them.
The unstated disclaimer, right? Yeah, but not with this team, not with this build.
But not with this contractor, not with this architect, and then I remember once being interviewed. I won't name the company, but we had sold to a global conglomerate that we'd done 100 projects, and we were in the interview, and they said, "You're connected to our Wi-Fi, and you're on the internet. Show us how your knowledge management system works, that you, as an individual, have access to the knowledge from those 100 projects that you told us you'd done."
What? Oh, put you on the spot.
Put it on. It's on the screen.
Right.
And you cannot imagine the chaos that ensued from that. Because they said, well, surely if you've done 100 data centers, you've got this data center knowledge, a platform that allows you to interrogate how this project relates to the 100 that you've done.
Oh, this is a great test. Oh my gosh. I mean, it just separates the wheat from the chaff immediately, I would assume. Did anybody have anything to show?
Oh, I was in the room too. I just remember just sitting there going, oh my gosh, I'm really glad they haven't looked me in the eye, because,
right.
and then you start looking at knowledge management systems. You go, afterwards I go, wow, we should have a knowledge management system. And so we started to try and create one, and you just realize that, we just didn't have the ability to do it, right? And we go, well, we started looking at, there's a company, Knowledge Architecture. We just started looking at that, and it's more of an intranet, where you can, I'm almost like Slack on steroids type of thing, where you can ask questions and you can group people together, have discussions around it. But if you want really hard data, like, what engineer knows what anything costs? I don't know an engineer who knows what anything costs.
Architects don't either. Yeah, I mean, you're always throwing something over the wall and then waiting for a cost estimator to put it back. I mean, obviously new tools are trying to address this issue, but it's...
Cost estimators don't know. Cost estimators have to go out to the subcontractors, because most of the general contractors, when in the 1980s, general contractors built things. They self-performed construction. But that ended with competitive bidding in the 90s.
Right.
And now contractors don't build any. I remember once writing, I wrote a letter. This is how bad I am. I wrote a letter to Bovis in the 1990s saying, can you just explain to me why your fee is more than the UPS? Because it seems like you do exactly the same job. Just pass paper from one place to another.
Right.
Added no value to it. And okay, that was pretty bad of me to do that, but I was very frustrated that every time I asked a question, they go and have to ask a subcontractor who gave them the answer, and then they pass it back to me. And I'm like, what's the point of this? Aren't you employed for your knowledge and means and methods and costs? And you say that you don't have it. And the construction industry's done that to itself. If you ask an engineer to schedule a construction project, they'll say, we don't know. How many cranes do you need on the site? We don't know. Where's material going to get stored? We don't know. What are the logistics of building? We don't know. How many labor hours are required to build this? We don't know. I mean, there's so many. We got to focus on the problems that we can fix. So we have an aging workforce in construction, and our tradespeople are aching out. So we have to find a way to build buildings with less labor hours. Otherwise, they're going to get more expensive. There's a simple problem. Build with less labor hours, you start to get solutions for how to build buildings with less labor hours. But people can't focus on solving a particular problem. They try to solve them. The industry's big and it's broken, so our startup's going to revolutionize construction. I hate that. How many companies are revolutionizing construction? Give me a break.
You're painting a dire picture here, Steve.
No, I'm painting a solution. I'm painting a focused solution that how you solve a problem. You focus on what is in your control and you get really good at it. If an engineering firm that's doing multifamily housing said, we're going to really focus on building the most cost-effective multifamily housing, right? You could create a solution to that. So you'd have to understand cost. You'd have to understand efficiency. You'd have to understand standardizing design. You'd have to get yourself out of meetings that are pointless and focus on doing what you're paid to do. And you'd create an incredibly efficient way to design multifamily housing.
Let's take a short break from the conversation to invite you to join the most influential technology leaders in the AEC industry at Confluence. Composed of in-person events and a podcast co-hosted by yours truly, Confluence is designed to foster conversations between AEC firms and technology companies so they can learn, share, and engage with each other to support industry innovation. Software company Avail, which creates content management solutions for the AEC industry, started hosting Confluence events in 2019 to understand what firms are needing, wanting, and thinking around technology. To learn more about Confluence, explore upcoming events, and listen to podcast episodes, go to confluence.getavail.com. My thanks to Confluence for supporting this episode of the Troxel Podcast. And now, let's get back to the conversation. So many firms are set up to be the answer to so many different kinds of projects, project types, market segments. And so what you're really saying here is focus on a thing and not try to do all the things for all the people.
The trouble with construction industry is that everybody gets well paid for screwing up.
What is the stat that I've heard is like 50 cents on the dollar is wasted in this industry. 50 cents for the owner, for the owner, right? Like they're spending twice as much that they should be spending for the same thing.
I would say at least. And the fact is that every engineer, I said the other day, in a LinkedIn post, all engineers are rich, right? If you want to have a definition of rich in the United States is a net worth of about $5 million. I would say most professional engineers could reasonably aspire to have a net worth in excess of $5 million by having a career in the construction industry as it is today. And they get well paid and they get paid for working in a broken industry. And on a time basis, on an hour, hourly fee basis. So engineers will be making, they'll be charging clients, north of $200 an hour, and clients will pay it, and so they get where is the burning platform,
right?
And who would want to change that? If that's your situation, you go, what's the option that we can do a building for zero, for like a penny? And we get paid on value. And if the permit doesn't get given, we don't get paid. Mm-hmm. No, let's just get paid hourly and
too risky.
Put the risk on the clients.
Right.
And construction is the only industry where it really doesn't care about its customers. I mean, the customers are completely disconnected.
Right.
If you buy a house, go and buy a house, even a brand new house, just built, how much input in the design of that house do you have?
Oh, for sure.
Nothing.
Yeah, zero. Yeah.
And the same for a building. The clients have virtually, no input there's no consideration for the users of that building and by the designers. And that's the only industry I know where the customers don't seem to matter.
Well, I would push back on that, just coming from the design side. Like there is a lot of, and it's not fully integrated. So I think the distinction maybe that you're making is like, yeah, they're not there for the day-to-day decision making, but there's definitely, that's an architect's job, is to synthesize all of their requirements and needs and wants and all of those things as much as they can into the design of a building. But it's a very small percentage of actual buildings that get built that are done that way.
Well,
1%.
Even that, I would say it might be the architect's job, but I'd say how often does the architect get the feedback from the users after a project is built?
Well, that is a different, so a minute ago you were talking about design, but now you're talking about, I mean, the architect is done with that project as soon as it's occupied, basically.
No, what I'm saying to you is that if an architect is designing a building for the users, how does the architect do that if it doesn't have any conversation?
It doesn't get the feedback loop of the actual usage.
I think I've created you a perfect building, right? And so I'm not even going to talk to you now. For the next 35 years that you use it, I'm not going to talk to you because I know it's perfect, right? And you're going, whoa, hold on, it's not. And I'm just going, no, I'm fine. I'm doing the next one now.
Yeah.
Based on my lack of knowledge of the last one. So, I'm not sure. I want you to push back on me because you say I'm painting a dire picture of construction.
No, that's real. That is a completely real thing. So I wasn't tying the after story into the beginning story, but you're right. Like every building is a prototype at some level. And then as soon as that building is done, yes, we are on to the next one for sure as architects, because that's the business model, right? It's like, what's next? Keep things in the backlog, keep things in the pipeline. What's next? Really turning a blind eye to how did that really go? How did that really turn out? And there's no business model currently that I know of people actually employing that engages clients after occupancy and learns through that process.
And architecture, I mean, if we're talking about architecture, look at what it celebrates. Look at the architectural awards. Go and look at the Sterling Prize of buildings. And it sort of glorifies beauty.
Well, and that's just for architects. Like that is just awards for architects, for other architects to know. It's not for that people who actually use those buildings.
So which is the award that glorifies the value that it brings to the joy that it brings to the users who are in the building? Which prize?
It's like the Oscars, right? You're giving awards to people, making millions and millions of dollars for doing their job.
Fly the Oscar. Yeah. But it doesn't say what the box office success of the movie was. And what did people think of it? If you said it was based on Rotten Tomatoes ratings, it'd be a completely different set of awards that you give out. But what is the Rotten Tomatoes ratings for architecture? Because most buildings I go into, or even in looking at the awards, I look at the candidates, and I look at it and I go, well, how is it going to function? And I go, imagine living in that house that's a glass box. Mm-hmm. And how is it going to? You've created a glass box, and then you got to find a way to cool it because you've got those windows that are facing west, but they look out over the forest. And I'm like going, really? How does that work when the guy's going to put the blinds down all the time because of their solar gain?
So you can't see the view, right?
But they don't care. They don't care. Well, it's got a beautiful view over the forest.
It's beauty.
And I'm like, what are we glorifying? It's the wrong thing.
Yeah.
So if construction focused on, if it cares about sustainability, or it cares about cost, or whatever it might be, why aren't we focused on that? Why aren't those designers? You said, designers try to be something to everybody. professional service engineering and architectural services are like prostitution, right? As long as somebody pays, everybody knows what the job is. It doesn't matter what it is. As long as we get paid, it's fine. And I'm like, it shouldn't be like that.
Yeah,
It shouldn't be like that.
So what does a potential positive future look like for this industry? How do you see that how could you see that playing out? What would be your vision for that?
Oh, I think what we've got to do, I mean, in my small way, what I'm trying to do is try and get parts of the industry that focus on effectively solving the problems that the industry's faced in the realms of what they can control. So, in terms of startups, I'm involved with DTE materials, and we're trying to create a sustainable material. So using a fiber that we can process that replaces sand in cementitious products as carbon negative. So we're a sustainable business making cost-effective material that replaces sand in cementitious materials. So we're 100% focused on that. We know that we can get the cost down to equal or less than the current cost of sand. We're not going to be able to scale that product. So laser focused on that. At Gropius, we're focused on housing, multifamily housing, solving the multifamily housing problem using automation. So we have a factory, it's completely automated, a design process. We've standardized components, and we can build less than the construction industry can build stick builds. We can build for cheaper in Germany than the construction industry can build in an automated process. But we're focused on getting the costs down because we know unless we get the costs right, we won't be able to scale it. So laser focused, and the same with standard companies. I'm trying to get companies who say, like focus on the highest and best use of your time and getting all of your people focused on what is the most important thing to do and get rid of all that stuff that you've created that just pads out the day. And so you get efficiency. And so, that's I can't change the construction industry. Will the outcome of all this make a big difference to the construction industry? Maybe not, but it'll make a big difference to the people who are involved in the things that we're trying to do.
I go back to kind of how do you do that? Because it seems like if it's a startup, it's like, this is why we exist, right? We exist to do this laser focused thing that you're talking about. Then there's companies, firms that have been around for a very long time who are like, we'll do anything. Like, we're up to the challenge. Like, there's a positive side to that, but there's also a negative side to that, which is we're the shotgun approach. We're trying to do any job to keep the machine running. And then within that organizational structure, everybody has a different incentive, right? Business development people have one incentive. Project teams have a different incentive. Project managers on project teams have a different incentive than a designer on a project team, right? And so, like, being able to lasso and wrangle that back into a vision of, this is the problem we're trying to solve, Ted Lasso style, putting the paper up on the wall that says, believe, or whatever that is for your company, for your firm, and getting everybody to actually pull in the same direction on that.
Well, see, what you're describing is for an existing company that's doing things in a certain way. The analogy is, you're flying your turboprop aeroplane, and you've seen this new thing, jet engines have come out, and you say, wow, wish we had jet engines. How do we go from turboprop to jet without landing? How do we change the engines? And so that seems like such a problem. It's such an intractable problem. How on earth would you go about doing it? But the reality is that everything you do has to be done incrementally. You've got to do the things that are under your control. So, you describe things like incentives. The sales team have an incentive to sell. So there's, at Katerra, the sales team had an incentive to sell under cost. They were incredibly successful. If I can sell at half the price, everybody's going to buy it. If I can't deliver it, I just chew up my investors' money. That's the story of the collapse of Katerra. And so you can't do that. Everybody has to be aligned with the same incentives. So first of all, you don't put like we believe, or, I did a thing the other day on the big engineering firms all have a mission to make the world better. I don't know what I could do with that. If I get up the next day, this morning, I go
It's
into
not specific. Yeah.
it doesn't really make anything. Get everybody to if you got everybody to say, here's what your job description is, here's your role, here's your responsibilities, and here's the authority to carry it out. If you just simply started with that, so that people had the power.
People do not have those things you just said. They don't have them.
They don't
right?
have, no. I mean,
No.
It's a time of year where people get promoted. And I sent a note out the other day and said, if you get promoted, make sure that with your increased responsibility, you have the authority to actually carry it out, right? Otherwise, it's not a promotion. It's a different title.
Yeah.
The different title. And so, if you look at things like, there are systems like RASCI, right, where you say, who's responsible for this? What authority do they have? Who do they have to consult with or inform about what they're doing? But give them the authority to do it. And if they can't do it, change them. And if you just started to say, I'm not going to accept people who are just hanging around because their cousin worked for us in 1968. I'm going to make people responsible for things. I'm going to give them the authority to do it, and I'm going to measure them on how well they do. Then you would have a more efficient organization. But people don't like to do that. They have their roles and titles, and they overlap, and nobody really understands who's in charge. And you can change all that. All of that is within your control. And it doesn't, any company, whatever it might be, any architectural firm could say tomorrow, right, I'm going to align responsibility and authority in this organization. And you would change the organization,
right,
pretty well overnight. And yes, some people would lose their jobs and some people would be successful, but you'd be making the right people successful.
I feel like there's also a lot of things like the things you're talking about on paper that individuals don't feel is the reality. Like it says they have the authority to do things, but there's a lot of asterisks after that. If you go through all of this red tape to actually make that happen. And so there's a lot of moving parts in this equation. You kind of need some kind of baseline reset to say this is how we're doing things moving forward and hold people accountable to that.
Well, you have to trust people, and one of the things that people don't do is that they don't really trust people. So
Absolutely.
Giving somebody authority means you're going to get out of the way. So there are all these sayings, the role of leaders is to create leaders. So yeah, sounds great, right? But what it means is you got to say, I'm going to give up some of my authority and I'm going to give it to you and I'm going to trust you to do it. And so, they're going to come back to you next week and say, I just fired Joe. And here's what I fired them because I told them to do X and they messed up, or the client, or I was unhappy and I just decided to do it. And you're going to say, I don't like it because that's my wife's cousin, but I gave you the authority and I have to live with the consequences. If you made a mistake, then that's on you.
Yeah. There's not a lot of that. I mean, there's a lot of sweeping things under the rug, looking the other way. There's a lot of like, oh, that's uncomfortable. I don't want to go there in corporations today. There's also a lot of people hiding in all the red tape because they're comfortable doing what they're doing and not being able or not wanting to do more. They'll take that title change, they'll take that money bump, but they absolutely don't want to do more, right? And so there's a lot of that in the system as well.
Everybody knows who's not doing their job well.
The people who work next to them, yes, but the people who make those big decisions, a lot of times they don't know, or because what I heard this recently from Mark Andreessen did a long podcast on the Senra podcast, and he talked about the gray suits at IBM, and it was like every level is lying to the next level so that the person at the top gets the best possible story, right? And they're just oblivious to the actual situation.
Yeah, I actually think, having been in that situation, I sort of don't think it's true. I think people know. First of all, if that is the situation, that you've got a very dysfunctional organization.
Absolutely.
If people can't be honest, but and you do when you set up an arrangement like we're going to do annual reviews. We're going to do an annual review, and then you tell everybody, and your annual review is not at all tied to promotion or salary. It's just a check-in with you to see how it's going. Well, you've just created lies, right? Well, because if the only time you ever know how anybody's doing is when they get interviewed for their annual appraisal and somebody ticks some boxes, and then you come and have this meeting where you're not telling the truth and you don't really know the truth. So you have to, if that's your organization, shame on you, right? That you should know from client feedback. I mean, it's the simplest thing in the world, is that at the end of every project to talk to the customer, whether that's a contractor, if it's an engineer, maybe it's the architect, it doesn't really matter who it is. How do we do? Who did you like? Who would you use again? What did our team do? Let me just run down our team and tell me who you thought was good and who you thought wasn't. If you've got customer feedback, as a leader, if that was your job to get customer feedback, you would know. You don't need somebody to tell you in the organization. But as I said, construction's broken. We don't talk to customers. I mean, we say we do. When we're chasing projects, we're all over them. You wine and dine will be every cheese and wine, looking around the room with a glass of wine, trying to find a familiar face that we can talk to win the next project. No problem with that. Go and get feedback on performance of individual team members on your team and how the various parties they interacted with consider them. We don't do that.
Yeah.
I don't understand why.
It's vulnerable. It's like you're going to hear things you don't want to hear.
But that's a problem, isn't it? We just say, it doesn't really
better not to know.
It doesn't really matter. We'll live in our world of fiction, our office. It's like Jim Halpert, right? We just live in our little office, our world, and we're not really bothered about outside. We're not really bothered about what people outside have to say, because that's not as important as what we have to say to ourselves.
And the people writing their reviews are usually writing their own reviews nowadays, right? And for someone else to review the self-written review. I mean, you play the game, right? Like this is the game that happens inside of modern AEC firms.
Yeah, but we've created this,
Yes, absolutely.
It goes down, your question was like, what do we do about it? It comes down to the individual level. If you get up tomorrow morning and say, okay, I heard that idiot on that podcast, but the one thing he said that I agree with is a sheet of paper, highest and best use of my time in the left-hand column, everything else in the right-hand column, get rid of everything in the right-hand column, and then spend the time I create to make the left-hand column more effective and efficient. I'm going to do that. For the next 30 days, I'm going to do that and see if, and you would become more valuable to your company. Your boss would think you were doing a better job. Your clients would think you were doing a better job. It would be a 100% improvement. And you wouldn't be attending wasteful meetings that have no value to you whatsoever, or to the person who runs the meeting. But, it would be progress. And you would get an incremental improvement in the performance of the company.
Do you feel like that kind of thing could be put onto your staff, or does that have to come from the grassroots, like personal intrinsic motivation that certain people have and a lot of people don't?
I'd say the view, like if you look at it, how many hours are you awake in your life, and you're not going to get them back,
right?
Why are you wasting them? Why'd you just waste your time? Hey, there's limited amount of time that you're going to spend on this earth. Why do you waste it doing things that have got no value to you or anyone else? I mean, it's okay if you like sitting on a beach. I like sitting on a beach, and I'm perfectly happy to waste my time, whittle away my time sitting on a beach. But I'm not happy to waste the time sitting in a meeting that's about completely pointless to me. And there's no joy in it. And life's too short. And most of it, COVID made us all realize that our lives are gonna come to an end. No matter what age you are, you suddenly realize, your own mortality. And people, that's why people work from home now, because they suddenly said, you know what, there's more important things than commuting. And my family's got more important than my job. And so just start focusing on what's important.
Yeah.
I mean, that it's as simple as that, because you're not going to get the time back. And money's not important. It's not about money. It's about self-worth and creating, you becoming the best person that you can be. And who wouldn't want to do that?
Hey everyone, I want to take 30 seconds to talk about something that really matters to me. This podcast exists because I believe this industry deserves better conversations. No agenda, no corporate backing, just honest, in-depth dialogue with the people actually shaping where AEC is headed. More than 25,000 of you listen to this show, and less than 50 of you are direct supporters of what I'm doing. And I'm not saying that to make you feel guilty. I'm saying it because if this kind of independent media matters to you, if these conversations have ever changed how you think or introduced you to someone worth knowing, then the most direct way to keep it going is to become a Troxel Plus member. $12 a month, ad-free episodes, the full Leadership Edge newsletter with my deep dives and the things I don't say on the podcast, and the knowledge that you're one of the people making this possible. Head over to the website at trxl.co and click the join button. And either way, I'm really glad that you're here. Now let's get back to today's conversation. So you mentioned a little bit ago this idea of changing from a prop-driven aircraft to a jet engine aircraft mid-flight, right, without touching down. What do you see happening in the industry right now that has the potential to be that next version that's exciting to you? I mean, you're obviously working with a bunch of startups who have a vision and are doing things. What are the tools, the ideas that are out there? It doesn't have to be technology, right? Technology has a very broad actual definition, right? It's not about bits and bytes. It can be atoms as well. So it could be people, right? So what do you see happening out there that has you kind of, excited about the future?
So I like that there are things that are being done, like people who've got ideas of things that I think could make a big difference. So, I like what KP Reddy is doing in trying to create an AI-enabled business that can plug onto existing businesses and supercharge them. I don't think software will save the construction industry. I don't think, there's an app to fix the construction industry. And I do think it's about people who are prepared to say that in an industry that really doesn't have the time, when people get paid for time, they don't have time for anything else, right? They're just trying to get paid all the time for their time. So if that's all you value is time, you just don't have any spare time and my idea of getting rid of things that are not the highest and best use of your time is to create, stop doing something before you can start doing something else. And so I think, he's trying to create that ability for firms to create time to make themselves supercharge their businesses. And I quite like that as an idea. I also quite like the idea of what companies like VBC, construction are trying to do in the Helena Lidlow is trying to sort of think through how do you create offsite construction that uses less labor hours? And I think he is coming to the conclusion, I may be putting words in her mouth here, that it's all about the connectors. It's it's not about the boxes, which most of offsite construction is focused on. It's about how do you connect these volumetric or panelized parts together in a way that doesn't require labor. And other industries have solved that. You can go into Costco and buy a 90-inch high definition television, right? And you can bring it home in a huge box, put it in your house, and you can plug it in the wall. You don't need to be an electrician. They've invented a connector that doesn't require skilled labor to install it.
Mm-hmm.
The construction industry needs to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you need somebody to put a nail in wood that's had to go through an apprenticeship? It just doesn't make any sense that we have to pay highly paid labor to do things that can be done by a machine. So I'm not suggesting robots nail wood together, but they could. And so, but there's a whole bunch of connectors for, air, water, electricity, and structural that could be done. If we can connect an aeroplane in midair and refuel it,
Mm-hmm.
why can't we drop a panel onto a floor and it connects itself?
Mm-hmm.
Why do we need humans to be even involved in that? And yet, if you're watching on the construction side, there's 6 people involved in putting a panel on the floor. Waste of time. So I quite like what VBC Construction is trying to think through. And I think there are, I could go on. There's a lot of these. I like some of the new materials that are being developed. People looking at finding ways to create the circular economy around natural materials. I'm a big proponent of biomimicry. I see a lot of value in biomimic solutions. Using mushrooms to replace leather, and there's a whole bunch of new materials that we could use that stops us being so wasteful. If you look at the energy that goes into aluminum, for example, compared to the energy that goes into some of these natural materials or bamboo, I can see a lot of interesting areas of new materials. So they're all, you might say they're point solutions to the problem, but I think that's how the construction industry is going to change, through a series of cost-effective point solutions.
Seems like there's a ton of potential there. And I'm just curious, maybe as a last topic, high-level overview. I don't know how much you want to go into the details of this, but obviously you mentioned earlier Katerra failed. A lot of modular construction companies have failed, right? Whether it's volumetric or not. But I'm just curious, where do you think can this actually work in,
Or if you look at Sears Homes in the 1920s, Sears sold homes out of catalogs in the 1920s and shipped them on rail cars. They designed them to fit into a rail car, shipped them around the country. The US had a rail system in the 1920s. I don't know if you know that. Had a railway system that allowed things to go around the country. We lost that over the last 100 years, but
absolutely.
But the people have done it. Pulte Homes did it previously in a later time. So there's no doubt that modular construction can work. At the moment, the problem is that it's mimicking. A lot of the modular companies are mimicking on-site means and methods because they've tried to fit into the construction industry. Mm-hmm. And equally, there isn't a procurement route. If you're a client, you have to choose a modular company very early, and you take out the non-competitive nature of construction. Construction is bid out right to the last moment on every single thing. You have to pick somebody up front. You have a different cash flow model with that company. And because there's no trust in the construction industry, people are reluctant to do that. So the market share of modular is 5% or less. Yeah. And at that volume, you can't drive the price down because there still is a connection between scale and price. And so we've got to find a way to do that differently. And maybe, it begins with components. Maybe it's bathroom pods where they're incredibly labor intensive and they could be standardized, and somebody, Oldcastle tried it, didn't really work, but maybe there's a route for things like that. Maybe it's cabinetry and for kitchens or something like that, where somebody can do something that is manufactured, that drives the price down, increases the quality, and can be scaled. And then people start to look at it. So right now, modular construction, volumetric, you can only ship economically 500 miles from a factory to a site.
Right. Mm-hmm.
They're little islands that sit around the country. And if you want to create a national program, first of all, you've got to get the jurisdictions to buy into it. And, they've got to say, we will approve in a factory something that we don't have to approve on site anymore. and that requires a government change, and change in government policy, and then you've got to find a way to economically ship it around the country, and then you can scale it.
Yeah, I mean the idea of owners, buyers, right, consumers actually buying into a system like that is nascent, I guess. They don't, their neighbor didn't do it, right? They don't know anybody who's done it, is risky, and it changes the business model, and like throughput matters for these companies, right? You've got to have, if you've got a factory, it's got to be doing stuff all the time, or else it's not going to be you're not going to be able to, right? So it's like this chicken and egg kind of an issue that keeps coming up.
What Katerra showed is, Katerra at one point had, I can't remember the size of the backlog, but it was billions of dollars in backlog. And the reason it had billions of dollars in backlog is it was selling a product lower than the construction industry today can deliver it. Mm. So there is no doubt in my mind that if you get to a point where you have a product cheaper than it can be done by the construction industry, the clients will buy it. There's no doubt. That's how the motor industry expanded. It's got to get the price point down. And right now, most of these modular companies are not selling. They're saying we can build faster. I talked to a developer, and we were trying to build a Katerra model in 90 days. And I was talking to developers and saying, what's the value to you of having a project built in 90 days? And they said, it's a cost to us. The market can't absorb that amount of units in that shorter space of time. Our whole model is designed on the building taking 15 or 16 months to build, because then we can get market absorption rate to sell. And our cash flow is spread out over a longer period of time. There's no value to build it faster. So stop trying to sell it, because it's no value to a developer. Get the price down. Now they're interested. And if it comes faster at a cheaper price, maybe it's because they'll get faster market absorption if they can sell. You have to hit 2 points of the triangle. That was my experience working on any kind of prefab, component-based, panel-based, whatever. It was always like, yeah, you can do it faster, but it's not cheaper, right? And you still have to have basically a similar size construction crew on site doing this stuff. Yeah, the stuff shows up and they plug it in. Some skilled labor has to do that, but just faster was never enough. No, and better quality is not enough. The thing I say is wrong with the worst thing in the construction industry in 2026 is caulking. Because we never, you don't need to worry about tolerances. You just put some caulking in it when it doesn't fit. And you don't need to worry about dissimilar materials being put together. Just stick some caulking in the joint. And so all of a sudden, it'd be like if you bought a Tesla and when it arrived, there was caulking in the doors and caulking in the roof to stop the roof light leaking and all that. You'd go, this is awful. But construction is like that all the time.
Yeah, I think this brings it full circle, Steve, because when I heard you talking at the Built conference, you were talking about the bottom base of the drywall where it meets the floor, and we just covered up with baseboards, right? Because that's the solution, and that's the solution everywhere on every project is topset base, baseboards. There's
and make them look nice, but like they put a little feature in the top of the baseboard to make them look nice. So that people dust. Want them. Crown mold. Everybody wants crown molding, which is great, right? Because, it was it covers up the cracks at the joint of the walls and the ceiling, and that is the construction industry. And then guess what? Now we can sell baseboard, and now we can sell crown molding, which nobody needs. It adds like no value, but it becomes desirable, and it helps us solve our problems of lack of fit. It's like crazy, and I just I extended my house and I wanted a polished concrete floor and I wanted it to line through with the existing floor. Oh, the contractor just kept telling me it couldn't be.
Impossible.
It's done. It's there.
but before.
Couldn't be done. There's like no way that we could do this. I must have gone through 7 or 8 iterations of it's impossible.
Wow.
Yeah.
You're like, fine, I'll do it myself.
I didn't get it myself. They did it. I got them to do it. But I had to show them. I had to show them how to do it. And I go, most clients just haven't got the time to do that on a project.
Yeah, they wouldn't. They would just take their word for it. They would take their word for it. And so what's the problem? Why is craft gone from that scenario, from all of these scenarios?
Don't
They
value
just don't
it.
have.
Don't value it, and it's not considered. I mean, if you said, what's the difference between architect, engineers, and general contractors? They're all jack of all trades now and master of none. So architects should understand time, cost, and quality of the projects they design. But they don't. They don't even spend much time designing. How many hours a week does not?
No, the incentive is to not spend time designing. Like the fee is based on spending as little time as possible on that.
And everybody's the same. Contractors spend no time building, and engineers spend no time engineering. The amount of hours they spend in a week engineering. I tried doing a LinkedIn survey about it, and I can't remember, like maybe only 10 or 12 people answered, but it was less than half the hours in a week that people spend doing what they were hired to do.
Why do you think that you only got 10 people to respond? People don't want to know the answer. They don't want to look at the truth. They don't want to hear it.
And people replied to me on LinkedIn privately and go,
yeah,
I'd love to comment on your post, but my employer wouldn't like it.
Oh.
Fear.
Yeah.
We do have a fear-based industry that people, people can't say what they think because they're scared of what, and whether it's politically, I mean, we've become incredibly polarized.
Yeah.
People can't say, I can say threatening and mass genocide of the entire population of Iran is really bad. But if I said that, people wouldn't reply to me. If I wrote that on LinkedIn, people wouldn't reply to me because they'd go, yeah, I agree genocide is really bad, but I don't want to be seen to potentially be, anti half of the population of the country because they could be my clients.
Okay, so what's the last thing that you want to say here that is a spicy take like that people want to respond to but won't? Like, what do you think is the future of the AEC industry?
Don't be like an episode of The Office.
The site.
Don't be that. Look at yourself honestly. Look in the mirror and say, how do I start becoming a caricature of myself?
Mm-hmm.
And if you do that, you'll change. And if you change, the industry will come with you.
Nice. Well, I hope people actually heard that and made it through this recording. I feel like there was a lot of great stuff in this episode, so I appreciate you taking the time.
No, it's fun. Thanks for asking.
Have this conversation today. So I'll have links to things that we talked about in the show notes. Steve, where can people follow along and get more Steve Burrows?
Oh, you find me on LinkedIn, and that's probably the easiest way. And my emails and my personal information there, so my business B2 Burrows, you can find me really easily if you want to talk to me. And if you just want a bit of advice, whatever, I'll always answer you. I respond to everybody. So yeah, just get in touch.
Great. Well, I'll put links to those in the show notes for this episode. Once again, thank you, Steve. Appreciate it.
All right. Take care. Thanks. Bye.
If you watched all the way to the end, thank you. That actually means a lot. I have two things I'd ask of you before you go. One, hit subscribe right now if you haven't already. It's totally free. It takes one click, and I'm really trying to get to 1,500 subscribers. We're not there yet, and every single one counts. If this show has been worth your time, that's the easiest thing you can do. Number two, if you want to go further, if you want to support independent coverage of this industry and get ad-free episodes of the podcast, plus my full Leadership Edge newsletter, head over to TRXL.co and click the join button. The link is in the show notes. $12 a month, and you'll be one of the people who actually makes this possible. All right, that's a wrap. Subscribe, share it with someone who would get it, and I'll see you in the next one.